CHEK Podcasts.
Mr. Pierre Poilievre, thank you very much for coming back to Vancouver Island.
Great to be back.
And thank you for joining us here on Mic Check at the CHEK Studios. I know we've got a lot of topics we want to hit, short amount of time, so I'm just going to try and hit as many as we can in that time. Does that work for you, sir?
Fire away.
Okay, so here on Vancouver Island, we have a lot of issues that are similar to the rest of Canada. We also have some that are quite unique to Vancouver Island. So in your perspective, what would be the biggest issue facing people on Vancouver Island in your eyes?
I think if I could pick two,
Sure.
I would say the skyrocketing cost of living and crime caused by the NDP Liberal governments. BC has taken it the worst. Housing costs in British Columbia are now among the highest in the entire world, which is really insane given how much land there is here. But the reality is that really obese bureaucracies and high taxes on home building have made Vancouver the most expensive housing market in North America. And of course, that radiates out to the island and the interior and the rest of British Columbia. And so I want to address that by, first of all, taking the GST off new homes to save buyers up to $50,000. Secondly, to incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut development charges. Third, by pushing the province to take its provincial sales tax off of new homes. These measures could save literally hundreds of thousands of dollars for every newly built home and bring back the dream of home ownership, which has gotten out of reach after housing costs have literally more than doubled in the last decade of Trudeau and the NDP, and risen faster than any other country in the G7. So that's the first. And then, of course, the cost of food and other essentials has gone up because of the carbon tax. And we intend to axe the carbon tax. Now on to crime. I mean, the catch and release criminal justice system, the liberalization of drugs has hit BC particularly hard. We see rampant violent crime. The catch and release laws, C-75, C-83, and C-5, all supported by the federal NDP, have turned the worst rampant repeat offenders loose on our streets. The radical NDP Liberal experiment with drugs is now becoming world famous for how horrible it has been. 47,000 Canadians have died, and of course, BC has the worst in all of Canada. So we intend to end drug liberalization, ban the drugs, stop giving out tax-funded drugs, and we're going to invest in treatment and recovery to bring our loved ones home drug-free.
Okay, so I asked you for one. I think you gave me three, but that's
Sorry.
okay. You know, no, that's all right.
Lots going on
That's
right
a political
now.
answer. Yeah, there's no shortage of topics to hit. Okay, you talked about your Axe the Tax rally. That's been something that you've said a lot of, and it's certainly resonated with a lot of people.
Yes.
I am interested because the environment is a very big focus for a lot of people, especially here on Vancouver Island. So the former Secretary General of the UN says climate change is the single greatest threat to a sustainable future. We're seeing, of course, historic wildfires in California right now. Every summer, there's a wildfire season in BC. So how do you make sure Canada still hits the carbon emissions targets while axing that tax?
Well, first of all, I think we have to realize this is a global problem. So, but by raising taxes on our businesses, all we do is drive production to more polluting foreign jurisdictions. And so, for example, we have a tomato farm in my riding. They pay a carbon tax on the CO2 they release into their greenhouse, even though it's absorbed by the plant life. Well, what does that mean? A Mexican tomato is now more affordable in my community than a local Manotick tomato. So people are then incentivized to buy the tomato that had to be trucked and trained right across North America from Mexico because they don't have the Canadian carbon tax. I want to bring that production home, and that means axing the tax. I also want to displace dirty foreign energy with clean Canadian energy. For example, LNG. When we send LNG from, as we will soon be doing, from Kitimat to Asia, we displace dirtier forms of energy. According to the chief economist of National Bank, if we were able to supply India with half of its electrical demand from our natural gas, rather than having them go with coal, it would displace 2.5 billion tons of greenhouse gases, which is 3 times the total emissions of the entire Canadian economy. So I want to rapidly greenlight these LNG projects as one of the ways that we can displace dirtier forms of energy.
I mean, Canada is the 11th highest CO2 emitter in the world. And a lot of those plans you talk about are more long-term, which long-term that would make sense.
Why should they be so long-term?
But they are long-term because it takes a while to build these plants.
Well, it takes longer to get them approved,
Yes.
unfortunately, because we have the second slowest building permits in the OECD. The Germans went from concept to completion on an LNG import terminal in 194 days.
Right.
Like, this
So
is
it
how
is-
the
it is
real
doable.
world. The
Yeah.
problem is we don't live in the real world. We live in Canada right now, where you can't get anything done.
Is net zero by 2050 a goal that you want to continue to pursue?
Look, I think we have to live in the real world. The bottom line is that all of our infrastructure is built around traditional hydrocarbons, and if we think we're going to completely eliminate that in 15 or 20, 25 years, I think that is a pipe dream.
Let's move on and talk about public safety. You've alluded to it earlier, saying it's one of the biggest issues facing people on Vancouver Island right now. How do you address this while also respecting it's a housing, mental health, and toxic drug crisis issue as well?
Sorry, how do I address which part of that?
Public safety in general.
Well, you got to lock up the criminals. The bottom line is we don't have a lot of criminals. We have a small number who are extremely productive, or I should say, destructive. And we know these people are going to reoffend because they have a track record of chronic career crime. So I will pass a 3 strikes law, which says that anyone convicted of 3 repeat offenses, 3 violent or serious offenses, will be ineligible for bail, parole, probation, or house arrest. And we'll take that very small number of criminals who do almost all the crime, and we will keep them in jail. Some of them will stay there forever. They will have life sentences. They will never come out alive. We will also secure our ports with high-powered scanners. We only inspect 1% of our shipping containers. That's where the drugs and guns are coming in. So we're going to have high-powered scanners that look into those containers and intercept the importation of illegal substances. And we'll pay for it by canceling this ridiculous gun grab. Licensed, law-abiding, trained, and tested hunters and sport shooters on Vancouver Island are not to blame for the violent gun crime. It's gangsters and gun smugglers. So I'm going to let the hunters and sport shooters keep their property and put the resources into going after the criminals.
And then as far as tent encampments are concerned, because there's a mental health aspect to it as well, and as I mentioned, toxic drug crisis part of it as well. How do you address that? Because a lot of people don't want to go to the housing that is being offered to them. So how do you actually address it?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to it. One is that the housing is unaffordable. So there are some people who are in tents because they can't afford a home, and there are other people who are there because they have addictions and other mental health problems. Let's start with housing costs. The reason we have such exorbitant housing costs is because we have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. And that's because we have the second slowest building permits and the highest taxes. Like in Vancouver, I know you're probably sick of hearing about Vancouver.
I lived there for a long time. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
But I know how people always. But the point is, in Vancouver, 60% of the cost of a new home is government.
Right.
We're spending more on bureaucrats than we do on carpenters, electricians, plumbers who actually build the homes.
Right.
So we have to slash the governmental cost of housing so that we can build more, take the GST off new homes, take the PST off new homes, cut the development charges, speed up the permits, free up the land, build the homes. On the mental health issue, the biggest mental health issue is addiction.
Right.
It's addiction to fentanyl. And frankly, all the government policies and all the public health agency approaches have made things worse. We now have, the drug dealer used to be a scary-looking guy on a street corner with a hoodie. Now it's a government bureaucrat who's handing out taxpayer-funded unsafe supply. And that is contributing to the problem. So I will be cutting that off. I'll be shutting the drug dens, and I will put all the money.
I want to stop you there with the drug dens because I'm actually very fascinated with that.
Yeah,
Because since
please.
2016, you alluded to it, more than 14,000 people have died in BC from the toxic drug crisis. You have been very vocal about these safe consumption sites, calling them drug dens. For the past 20 years, Insight in Vancouver, you mentioned Vancouver, has seen more than 4.6 million visits with 0 overdose deaths on site. So would you see a benefit to working with people who are frontline staff, who are advocates, who deal with this every single day?
Well, it depends what you mean by advocates, because the advocates are pushing policies that have made everything worse. Like this approach of having government facilitate drug use has been really pioneered in British Columbia. It's been done more in BC than anywhere else in the world. And what are the results? The highest drug overdoses of any place in Canada, for sure.
But a lot of times those are people using alone, right? That's a big issue.
But why is it that in BC, where this policy has been most enthusiastically embraced by all 3 levels of government, we've had the worst results? Why is it that drug overdoses are worse here in BC than anywhere else in Canada? Do you have an idea of that?
I don't, but that's why I'd want to talk to a lot of frontline staff and people who see what's happening every day.
Here's the problem. These advocates now have an entire profit-making industry built around this. They have a financial interest in keeping this going. The drug companies that are giving the hydromorphine, the bureaucrats, the agencies, the advocates that get the money, the last thing they want is for the problem to go away, because then they wouldn't have a job. So we have built an entire industry and bureaucracy that depends for its livelihood around the continuation of this problem. And that is why BC is the worst place in Canada for drug overdoses. I'm not interested in funding advocates and bureaucrats and pharmaceutical companies that have gotten rich off other people's miseries. I want to put the resources into, you talk about frontline, I'll tell you who's going to be getting the money when I'm Prime Minister. Organizations that have a proven track record of getting people off drugs. In fact, I will have a pay for results contract for them, and I will be paying them based on the number of people they get off drugs.
Wow.
And it will be a results-driven approach, and they will be working to put themselves out of business by getting rid of the problem and giving people their lives back. And for anybody who's addicted, I want you to have the hope that you can turn things around. So many people have had their lives turned around through recovery and treatment, and that's what we're going to provide.
Right. Voluntary for the most part. And I don't want to speak for advocates, but I would assume that they would like to respond to that saying, we don't want to see anyone die from the toxic drug crisis. It is horrific. Let's shift gears and talk about incoming U.S. President Donald Trump. You took a very strong stance with him last week, saying Canada will never be the 51st state and that we can bypass the U.S. by building more energy infrastructure, as you sort of put it. Trump also said just a couple of days ago, he doesn't care what you have to say. Your response to that?
Well, it's not about him or me. It's about putting Canada first. He's made it clear he wants to put America first. I'm making it clear I want to put Canada first. And that means that we have to develop our own infrastructure to export our energy and resources to the rest of the world without going through the U.S. We have to allow more interprovincial free trade in our own country so that we can actually trade across provincial boundaries. It's now easier to trade with the U.S. than it is to trade with each other. I will be cutting taxes on work, investment, home building, energy, and making stuff in Canada so that we can bring home those paychecks and production to Canada. And I would say to President Trump, I will retaliate with trade tariffs against American goods that are necessary to discourage America attacking our industries. I'd rather we work together, though.
Right.
Because if we do, we can have a bigger, stronger economy, and I will use the strength from that enhanced trade relationship to build our military, secure our borders, and help America, just like Canada, become safer, richer, and more secure.
I think it's a fascinating way to approach it. And you say it's not about you or Trump. If you are the prime minister, you do have to have that working relationship. So do you think that's a good tactic if he does make good on some of those tariffs that he's saying that could really hurt Canadian industries, right?
Unfortunately, it will. And it will hurt Americans as well. And so I will be making the case to the Midwest refineries that take in our oil. We send $100 billion of Canadian oil.
For cheap.
For $15 below market price. We're giving that energy to the Americans, and then they're reselling it at a huge profit. Frankly, if he cuts off his refineries and LNG plants from our resources, then there are going to be a lot of unionized American workers who are going to be out of a job, and many of them voted for President Trump. So I'm going to say to him, look, you're better off, and your workers are going to be way better off by deepening our trade relationship, not attacking your best friend in the world.
You know, politics is divisive in nature, no
Yeah.
doubt. But over the last few years, it's kind of gotten downright nasty. It's happened in BC politics as well, federal politics. It certainly is south of the border. Who does that benefit?
Well, what do you mean by nasty?
Well, it's gotten nasty, right?
so?
Like, I mean, you got kicked out of the House of Commons for calling the Prime Minister a wacko. A minister on the federal Liberals told you to grow a pair. Like, I think that's pretty nasty, is it not?
Well, I don't. I think it's actually what I said about Mr. Trudeau is true, and I think most people would agree it's true. And I think it's better to be blunt. I think we need a moratorium in politics on polite conversations, actually, because things are going really badly in this country.
Right.
And they're going really badly because I think politicians are giving themselves a nice pat on the back for screwing things up. At the end of the day, I think it's time our politicians were held accountable. And yes, that's going to mean sometimes tough language.
You'll embrace it. So even if
I-
you're Prime Minister, you want that nastiness coming towards you.
I
as
don't
well.
call it nastiness.
Okay.
I call it truth telling. If I have to choose between polite and truth, I pick the truth.
Okay. You know, I'm running out of time here, and I know your time is limited, and I thank you for taking the time to talk with us. A word you said there was truth. It's been 9 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report had 94 calls to action.
Mhm.
Canada's completed 13 of them so far. So is it important for the Prime Minister to work directly with Indigenous peoples in this country to realize more of those calls?
Well, there's two parts to your question. One is to realize more of those calls. The other is to work directly with First Nations. Obviously, we have to work directly. And that is what I propose to do by empowering First Nations communities to enrich themselves and break the dominance of the federal bureaucracy over their lives. I've said I would give, I would vacate federal tax room for companies so they could pay those revenues directly to First Nations communities when they develop resources on First Nations land. That would create own source revenues for First Nations communities to provide clean drinking water, education, and other services while generating paychecks for their workers. I mean, the problem is that the bureaucracy in Ottawa dictates everything, consumes the money, takes the money, and then makes these communities come and fill out endless paperwork to ask for it back. That doesn't work. We need to give more autonomy to the First Nations communities, allow them to raise their own money, and allow their people to have prosperity and jobs. That's the bright future that I offer First Nations.
I think that's very fair. But according to Stats Canada, 490 Indigenous women and girls were victims of homicide from 2009 to 2021, a murder rate 6 times the non-Indigenous comparison. So when it comes to issues that would need federal support, would you be there?
Yes. Well, in that case, we need to lock up the criminals that killed them. You know, like, who's killing these women?
That's what we need to find out.
Well, let's put them in jail.
Right.
And let's not let them out of jail. You know, if they're going on murder rampages in these communities, the murderer who commits the crime should be in jail.
Final couple of questions here. You've got such a very strong base. The Conservative movement is very real right across the country, including here on Vancouver Island. You've got that vote, but you've also have some people who may not agree with your policies and where you're going, including here on Vancouver Island. So how do you convince those people that you can be their prime minister and represent them as well?
Well, what I'm trying to do is bring back the common sense consensus that made our country such a wonderful place. Right. It used to be that liberals believed in liberty, conservatives believed in conserving it, and together we built the best nation on earth. We had something called the Canadian Promise, where anyone from anywhere could do anything. Hard work would get you a powerful paycheck and pension that would buy affordable food and homes and safe neighborhoods. And people controlled their own destinies. That has been lost because of a really radical woke departure by the NDP Liberals that it is really quite foreign to the Canadian way of doing things. I just want to get back to the common sense consensus that allowed us to have the best country in the world.
In a National Post interview 2 years ago, you said, if you become prime minister, you would want the House of Commons to look like Canada. So what does Canada look like to Pierre Poilievre?
To me, it means having more of the common people. I'm talking about not just not just lawyers and bureaucrats and CEOs, but also plumbers and electricians and carpenters. It means having people of all ages and from all walks of life, particularly people who perhaps didn't start off with much, but were able to build a great successful life through their own hard work. That's the kind of people. That's why it's called the House of Commons.
Right.
It's supposed to be the common people. It's why it's green. It's supposed to be the people who
House
work in the
of Common
field.
Sense is right there. I don't know why you haven't taken that yet. Or maybe you have.
I haven't had enough coffee after the jet lag from Ottawa.
We do something really quickly here on the end of each episode called a quick shift. Just fast-paced question answer. First thing that comes to mind. First car.
Mine?
Yeah.
Subaru.
First job.
It's Paperboy.
Your go-to order at Tim Hortons.
I would just say a black coffee.
Very good. Favorite Canadian band.
I would say Tragically Hip.
Good answer. Next Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup.
I'm just going to say the Calgary Flames.
Yeah, you grew up in that area.
I grew up in Calgary, so I have to be loyal.
You famously enjoyed an apple during an interview. Thank you for not
eating. British Columbian apple.
That's right. Okay, what is your favorite type of apple?
An Ambrosio.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was eating on that famous day.
Do you have one nice thing you could say about Justin Trudeau? You can pass.
I think he focuses a lot on his fitness, which is a good thing.
There you go.
We should all do that.
Health. If you weren't running to be Canada's next prime minister or in politics at all, what would you be doing?
That's a good question. I think I would probably be a writer or a businessman.
Yeah, I think you'd be very good at that.
Movie
about your life. Who's playing Pierre Poilievre?
Oh, geez, that's... Actually, you look kind of like me. Why don't you play the role, okay? Are you an actor?
I don't think so, yeah. My hair's not as good as yours, unfortunately. Favorite place to go on Vancouver Island, sir?
On Vancouver Island? I would say Victoria, right? You know, they had that little tugboat.
Oh, yeah.
That's a nice place
Inner
to
Harbor?
go. Yes, I enjoyed that place.
Yeah. You got to do the pickle pub crawl in Victoria. You might enjoy that.
That's probably a great way for me to get into a lot of trouble
It
that
would
could be used against me in a political scandal later on.
Well, after you do it, you can join us again right here on Mike Check. Mr. Poilievre, thank you for taking the time. And thank you for answering all these questions. I know we took up a lot of your time.
It's great
and
to
I appreciate
be here.
it, sir.
My pleasure. Many blessings to you.
Cheers.
All the
That's
best.
been another episode of Mike Check. You can
Thank
watch
you.
or listen anytime on the CHEK Plus app. Till we chat again.